I did Cinderella. I did Germany's version, and before I get started, it is slightly different than the basic version, like the Disney version, like we all know. How it's different is actually Cinderella's parents. She actually knows her mom and dad. That's how the story starts off. Is her dad's happily married and everything. Her mom actually ends up dying when she was young, and before her mom died, her mom told Cinderella to plant a tree on her grave, and that if Cinderella needed anything, to go shake the tree. And that's really a big point in the story. So I just wanted to let you guys know. And then her dad ended up remarrying, hence where you get the stepmom, stepsisters, and such. So first off, I worked with a lot of different colors. I Googled a lot of different, like what all the different colors mean. I ended up using black, white, it's like a charcoal gray, and then like a light blue. But I really did enjoy like the purples, the yellows are both very like royal colors. I really liked the green. I was kind of trying to figure out, my first scene is inside of a house and it's kind of grimy, and I liked that, but I thought the black and the gray and the white with the blue popping out looked a lot better. So then I kind of started working with shapes. I really liked how like Molly had really basic shapes. She didn't really have, her shapes didn't look like people or anything like that. So I first started off with the cylinders, thinking that could be like the stepmom and the stepsisters. But then I kind of moved to the tree, and I wanted to use the cylinder for the trunk, and I didn't want them to look the same. So I actually ended up using the hexagon, and I thought that was a really good representation because like the big one, it's wide, and it reminds me of like kind of like an older woman with like her big hips and something like that, whereas I used this hourglass shape for Cinderella down here because to me, it kind of, I think of like what we think of an ideal woman would look like, a really pretty, she's got a nice big chest, like a really narrow waist, and then big hips again. So that's how I kind of stumbled upon that shape, and then that would be the prince right next to it with really big broad shoulders, tall and lean, and I don't know, I just saw like a really muscular kind of thing, and then the tree was a really important part. So I first actually did like the really jagged tree with like the different lines and different shapes, but I didn't like it. I thought it, and it was also a lot of work to actually have to replicate that like 2 or 3 times. So I ended up just going with like the big poofy generic tree. So this was actually my first scene. I just kind of put it all together, and then I realized that I had more than the colors than I could use. So, but I really liked it, so I ended up kind of changing it just a little bit. And I made the stepmom and the stepsisters black, just because, I don't know, it looked menacing, and they're not very nice. You know, I was thinking black soul and generic things like that. And I made the stepsisters look identical because we don't really know how old they are or anything like that. But I wanted them to look like their mom, but they are younger. You know, they are supposed to be attractive. But I still, like I said, wanted them to look like the stepmom. So I made them a little bit skinnier, but shorter, so you could tell that that one stood out. And Cinderella, I made white because she's really innocent, but she's not a princess yet. So I outlined her in blue because she does have the potential. She's going to be a princess, but she doesn't know it. She's innocent. And then the tree is there in the background of the window to kind of lead up to the next scene. So the next scene was really generic. I did the tree because how the story goes is the stepsisters and the stepmom all go to the ball to go meet the prince and everything, and Cinderella has to do chores and stuff like that, and these birds come flying out of the fireplace or whatever and help her, and they tell her to go shake her mother's tree. So this would be the scene where she goes to the tree, and I kind of hid up in there as what Cinderella's dress is going to be, so like kind of leading up to like her becoming a princess, I kind of thought of, and kind of tucked it up in there so you can't really see it, and obviously where Cinderella is, she's not really going to see what's going on. It would be my scene too. And then this was my final scene, so this was the prince and her, and I added the lines to make it kind of look like they went together. I kind of moved them around, trying to figure out like how I wanted them to look. But whenever I just put them close to each other, it just looked like awkward shapes over each other. So the lines I thought helped because they're off dancing and together. And I actually researched kind of what prince would look like, and a lot of them have some kind of like emblem, so I added like a little star, and a lot have like a sash or something. He's white also. You know, white's really prestigious, it's clean, and it looks really nice. And then Cinderella now is finally a princess, and so I wanted to add, like, make it look like she has like a big blue dress on or something. It's kind of where I was going with. And then they do talk about a clock, but it's not as prudent, so I kind of put it in the background. But this was my scene 3. So I thought it was a really good representation. And I wanted to make it look like they were inside, kind of. So I just kind of added gray walls and just like a white floor. And that's it. Any questions? Frankie?
Is there a reason why you chose blue for the tree?
I chose blue for the tree because I felt like it went with Cinderella a little bit. It just kind of reminded me, the blue was strictly for Cinderella. I only used it for Cinderella and for the prince because blue is actually a really royal color. Also, when you go with light blue, it also represents innocence and stuff like that as well. So, I don't know, when I was thinking about the tree, the black looked menacing because that's what I had for the stepmom and stepsisters, and I had gray as like the walls, and that's when you first see the tree is when you have the gray walls around you. So, I don't know, I think blue just went, and the tree is also, in a sense, Cinderella's mom. So, I just kind of wanted to tie those together, so I made it blue. Yes.
I didn't know if you said or told us this, but the stepmom and stepsisters in the story, are they actually mean?
Yes, they are. It's a little different because Germany's version, the stepsisters are actually beautiful, but in like the Disney version, we always think of them as really ugly. They are two beautiful like sisters that go off to the ball, and they were gonna win the prince's heart until Cinderella came along. So that's why I kind of made them, I didn't want to make them as fat as like her, so I made them a little bit skinnier, but I wanted them to look, but yeah, they were also really mean. They kind of were like behind the mom. They didn't like give Cinderella like orders, but they certainly backed up their mom and supported their mom when the stepmom was like, not beating, but like verbally abusing Cinderella and making her do all these chores and stuff.
Is there a reason why, like for the tree, there's like a dotted outline?
I kind of played around with the lines, and I just didn't want a solid line. And the dotted line made me think of fluffiness, like actually leaves and stuff like that, or it's because the tree just doesn't have like a big generic line like that. So I don't know, the dotted line helped, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Zach.
At the beginning you said that the dad ended up marrying the stepmom. Did he die as well? In the Disney version?
I honestly don't know. He just kind of like was out of the story. It didn't really say much more after that. Once the stepmom and stepsisters entered into the story, you don't really hear much about the dad. So I'm assuming he passed away or something. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
Or it just is more realistic of the times in which the story begins, that the father had very little to do with daughters, and mothers and daughters are kind of a separate part of the household from fathers and sons.
In the story, does she get like a carriage and stuff like that?
Not really. There's no fairy godmother or anything like that in Germany's version. She kind of just winds, like she gets horses and she gets to go there, but like she shakes the tree, and she actually ends up going to the ball 3 different times. So she actually had 3 different dresses. You know, one was purple, one was gold, and then I think one was white. Which is why I was really sticking with like the purple and the gold, but they both stood out so much, and I really liked the blue, and that I could use blue controversially. So, Frankie.
What do you mean by Germany's version? Like country of that person?
When I Googled, I didn't want to do obviously the Disney version, and it just popped up as Germany's version, and just was different, so I just kind of rolled with
Is
it.
that the
Yes, it's a variant of Brothers Grimm. Maybe I should just explain this briefly. You will be able to look at things that are marked Brothers Grimm version and get several different Brothers Grimm versions. because what happens is they codify the story, and they're Austrian German, and then as time passes and people take the Brothers Grimm version to different generations, ideas about what we should tell children in stories change. And so often things that we think are violent or cruel get changed, but it's still the Brothers Grimm. So the German version is the one, in essence, that the Brothers Grimm worked with, the folk tale as it was passed down in German countries, and pass on, although there will still be variations within that. And that's all as opposed to, say, the Chinese version of the story, which is actually probably the earliest Cinderella version. There's also an Egyptian version, but the European one is essentially the German version. And then just to clarify, when you get to Disney is when you start getting decorative carriages and fairy godmothers and darling little mice turning into horses and stuff like that. Because Disney is always all about telling the story purely visually. So they made many additions. And that's how, I know when people are relying on Disney instead of actually reading a story, because there are things that just aren't in anything but Disney that make a big change in Cinderella. Other questions or comments? Good job, Gentry.